In this lecture, we will learn the first feature of PHP called variables. Variables play an integral role in any language. They allow us to store values in our program. Do you remember math class? In math class, some equations can contain variables. For example, x plus 5 is an equation with a variable. The letter x can represent a numeric value. Variables in math function similarly to variables in PHP. We can create variables for storing values. Unlike math, we don't have to store numbers. We can store other types of data such as names, addresses, file data, etc. Variables are convenient because we reference them at a later point in time. Enough talk, let's dig into the code. For this entire section, we're going to be working inside the test.php file. Before starting a lecture in this section, you should have this file opened. At the top of the file, let's add a pair of PHP tags. Follow along with me. Write the following code. Less than, question mark, PHP, question mark, greater than. We've written a pair of PHP tags. This is where PHP starts to become different from HTML. HTML is not known for being intelligent. We can't tell HTML to calculate values or output a set of tags if a condition is met. Whatever is written inside an HTML file gets outputted on the browser. This is where PHP comes into play. By adding an opening PHP tag, we can begin giving instructions. Code written inside this tag will be processed. We'll be able to perform complex logic from sending emails to processing a transaction. There are some rules to keep in mind. Firstly, we're not allowed to write HTML inside PHP tags. Otherwise, we may encounter an error. There is a way to write HTML, but we'll look at that later. We are allowed to write HTML outside the PHP tags. Secondly, we can create multiple PHP tags. We're not limited to a single pair of PHP tags. For example, I'll add another pair of PHP tags after the h1 tag. The code inside the first pair of PHP tags will be interpreted as PHP. The h1 tags will be interpreted as HTML. As for the second pair of PHP tags, they'll be interpreted as PHP. We are given flexibility with where PHP can be written. Lastly, it's optional to close a PHP tag. For example, if I were to remove the closing tag, everything would work. Omitting the closing tag is allowed as long as the file ends with PHP code. If we were to attempt to add HTML at the end of the file, we would get an error. Only PHP code is allowed inside a PHP tag. It's considered good practice not to include the closing PHP tag if you don't intend to write HTML after writing PHP. This practice makes our code readable. Let's adopt this practice in our PHP code. I'm going to leave an opening PHP tag in our file. Moving on, let's create a variable. After the opening PHP tag, we can begin to write PHP. Inside the tag, we're going to write a $sign symbol. The $sign symbol is an instruction for telling PHP to define a variable. In the English language, we have rules for how it's spoken and written. We refer to these rules as grammar. Programming languages also have rules for how they're written. The rules for a programming language are called its syntax. If we want to write a variable, we need to type a $sign symbol. PHP will understand we're trying to define a variable. The process of creating a variable is called a variable declaration. You may hear other developers say declaring a variable. The words creating or declaring are interchangeable terms. After typing the $sign symbol, we need to give our variable a name. There are rules for how variables should be named. The first character in a variable name can only be a letter or underscore character. It can't start with a number. After the first character, we're allowed to use alphanumeric characters. This includes the underscore character. For our first variable, let's call it age. I'm using lowercase letters, but it's perfectly acceptable to use uppercase letters or a combination of both. After giving our variable a name, we're going to add a space followed by an equal sign character. The equal sign character will tell PHP to assign the variable a value. We can give our variable any value. For this example, we're creating a variable for our age. I want you to set this variable to your age. In my case, I'll set it to 28. The last step is to add a semicolon. In English, we must end our sentences with a period. It's how we let others know we're finished with our sentences. This same idea applies to programming languages. We need to tell PHP that we're finished with this line of code. Afterward, it'll start running the next line of code. Currently, we've written our variable on a single line. If you're writing a single line of code, this is perfectly fine. However, you may prefer to format your code. HTML can be written on a single line of code. For readability, HTML is written on multiple lines. This same practice is applied to PHP. We are allowed to add spacing before and after the variable. We will be formatting our code throughout the course. We'll get to more code in a moment, but first, let's try running this code. In your browser, try refreshing the page. Nothing happens. That's to be expected. We didn't do anything else besides create a variable. PHP won't do anything with the variable besides store it. Back in the editor, we can tell PHP to output the variable by typing the word echo. The echo keyword holds a special place in PHP. It'll tell our machine to output the value written after it. Let's tell it to output the age variable. We can reference a variable by typing its name with the $sign character. PHP will search for a variable called age. If it finds this variable, it'll allow us to access the value stored in the variable. As a result, this line will output the age. Let's try rechecking the browser. Our age gets outputted on the page. Fantastic! We've created our first variable. Variables are one of the most commonly used features in the language. They allow us to store data. There's one more thing I want to mention before moving on. Variables are case sensitive. Below the first variable, let's create another variable called age assigned to 50. This time, the variable name will contain all uppercase letters. As far as PHP is concerned, these are two different variables. They have different casings. Therefore, our program will continue to output the value assigned to the first variable. If we recheck the browser, the first age gets rendered. If we want to override a variable's value, we need to reassign it. We can reassign a variable by typing the same code as before. Let's head back to the editor. Below the second age variable, we're going to set the age variable to 50. Pay close attention to the casing. The variables have the same name and casing. Let's check out the browser. This time, the output has changed. The number 50 gets rendered. So, that's how we can change the value of a variable. We have complete freedom over when and how a variable changes. PHP is very flexible in this regard. We'll continue our journey with PHP in the next lecture.